Hello everyone. I'm going to do a tutorial going over trigger groups and how to use them with the asynth part. Now with the asynth you have 4 oscillators, and the way to basically separate them out, so if we click select and the analog synth part, you'll hear a synth sound. Now, to understand how it's being activated in trigger groups, you go to set routing, and what you'll see is on page 1 of 3 you'll have trigger groups, trigger group VCOs. For your first oscillator, it's all 4 of them actually are going through trigger group 1. And what we'll do is separate them into different trigger groups. So I'll have trigger group VCO1 going through trigger group 1, VCO2 going through trigger group 2, VCO3 and 4 going through trigger group 3. So you click on the encoders or turn the knob to get it to go through a different trigger group. So now what we have is, you can still hear when I play a note, a sound, although now the oscillators are being activated by different trigger groups. Very quickly, another way to get to the different trigger groups is by pressing select and then holding down the analog synth. And you'll see that it says part 12, part 13, and part 14. That's actually kind of confusing because it's not saying trigger group 1, 2, or 3, but rather part 12, 13, and 14. But trigger group 1 is being activated at part 12, trigger group 2 is being activated by part 13, and trigger group 3 is being activated by part 13. So if we press part 13, we don't actually hear anything, and that's because of the different trigger groups and how they're routed. So now if we go back to set routing, and then go to page up, so we're on the second page, you can actually you can activate or have the trigger groups going through different parts. Trigger group 1 is being activated by the multi-mode filter. Trigger group 1 is going through the low-pass filter, or the low-pass filter is also being activated by trigger group 1. So what I'll do is, since VCO1 is going through trigger group 1, we'll also have the low pass going through trigger group 1. VCO2 is going through trigger group 2, so we'll have the multi-mode filter being activated by trigger group 2 as well. And then the noise and the filter bank, we'll have those going through trigger group 3. So now on page 3 of 3, you have trigger group 1, it's the note priority. So if you were to hold a note down, so it's high, so we're on, well, let's get back to part 12 or VCO1. Now if I hold a note down, I guess I must have oh, well, since I changed the routing, okay, yeah, I changed the routing, so nothing was working correctly, so we're going through the right channels. That's because VCO1 was going through the multi-mode filter, and when I changed that to trigger group 2, it's not going through the multi-mode filter anymore. So we'll go over the note priority later, or it's pretty well explained in the manual as well. So now I'm on part 12, but I don't hear anything. So the reason for that, there could be 2 reasons for that. So let's go to the first one, which is making sure that the oscillator is going through the right filter that I activated. Now I had it going through the low pass filter. So we go to oscillator wave under the asynth, and this is the waveform. We won't worry about that, or the envelope macro. We'll go to page 4 of 27, and we see that oscillator 1, the volume for that is 200. Since it's not being activated, let's shut that off. Page 5 of 7 is the low-pass filter. Now the volume for oscillator 1 is 0. So when we turn that up, now we can hear the oscillator. Now, if we start sequencing this, we can actually sequence trigger group 1, which is activating the low-pass filter, and the asynth oscillator 1. So if we go to sequence edit, let's just make new sequencer lines in case you haven't done that. We'll go to function, new. So I had created a new, which was line 16. We'll do target, asynth, global, trigger group 1. Now what you'll hear is that being in the sequencer line, you can hear the notes. So let's make a simple sequence. And we can just push play. So right now we could change the length of all of them. Or change the length of individual ones when you press the encoder above that note. So we can change the note corresponding at 7 to basically a second note, the length of this being a fourth of a step, and you'll hear the difference as we go through. Alright, so that's trigger group 1. This is activating both the oscillator 1 and the low pass filter. So now if we go back to set routing, if you remember, now we have VCO2 going through trigger group 2 and the multi-mode going through trigger group 2. Okay, so let's select analog synth, hold it down, and part 13. We don't hear anything when you press a note. So let's try to get the oscillator set up here. So we'll go back to oscillator wave, and it's set to basically a saw wave. Okay, go to page 2, it's 27, let's skip that. 3 of 7, let's skip that. And 4 of 7. Now it says that oscillator 2, which is the oscillator that's going through trigger group 2, is set to a volume of 200. Let's turn it all the way up to 255, and let's turn oscillator 3 and 4 down to 0. Alright, we still don't hear anything. Now, the multi-mode filter is set in this part of the filter settings, and we need to make sure that the filter is going through the bus. So let's push the encoder here and go to page 3 of 8. And this is basically the cutoff filter, or the cutoff, the resonance, and let's see, let's go to page 6 of 8. And this is the volume. Now this is actually telling us that the multi-mode filter is being routed through the low-pass filter. So the sound is bypassing, so the filter is basically open into the low-pass filter. But we want it going through the bus. So that would mean that it's being activated and you can just directly hear it. So now we can hear it. All right, let's set up a new trigger group let's set up trigger group 2 for line 17. So I hit target and we go to asynth, global, now trigger group 2. Okay, we can hear that. Now there's nothing set up here. Remember line 16, or the one that you set up, will show you that on line 16 that there's activated steps. Now when we go to 17, there's not, but it says trigger group 2. Alright, now let's say you want to have this, you want to create a line while the other step sequencer, or I'm sorry, where trigger group 1 is being activated. So we'll push play, and I'll just make a sequencer line to go on top of the trigger group 1. So this is in trigger group 2. Just remember that you have to hold down an encoder and then press a note. So basically it tells that note what to be. Alright, so we'll start off with that. We can set each of these to be longer length. You change the length. Alright, now we've activated trigger group 1 and 2, and that's activating independently oscillators 1 and 2. Oscillator 1 was set up in trigger group 1, oscillator 2 was set up in trigger group 2. And now we can go through and set up trigger group 3, which has oscillator 3 and 4. So if we create a new sequencer line, and we set a target for asynth global trigger group 3, we don't hear anything when we press the notes, or at least on mine I don't. Remember, VCO 3 and 4 are going through trigger group 3, and trigger group 3 is activating noise and the filter bank. So let's try and get some sound for that. First thing I would do is go to the filter bank level and check so the filter bank level is the encoder above 11, and it's set to 255. Well, let's make sure that our that oscillator 3 and 4 are being activated or are being routed to the filter bank. And that's on page 3 of 27. So I'll turn up the volumes for that. Don't hear anything yet. Okay, sorry about that. I actually had a tough time figuring out how to get that set up again, but figured it out again. So what we had gone through just a minute ago is looking at making sure the filter volumes were up. They are, and we still don't hear anything if we're trying to play the sound. So what you want to do is press the filter bank button and make sure that the filter bank is going to the bus. And we still don't hear anything. What we have to do to get the sound is actually open up the different frequencies for the filter bank. So you do that by being in the filter bank and the level and opening and turning on the level for that particular frequency. And you can just go through until you get a sound you really like. Now, one thing odd about the sound that I'm using for oscillator 3 and 4 is that if you go to the oscillator detune, oscillator 4 is set to -69, so I'll set that to 0. And then go to page 3 of 4 and change the pitch scaling for that to 12 so that it's actually, when you play the notes, it corresponds with the correct notes on the keyboard. So now we have oscillators 3 and 4 going through the trigger group 3 and being activated, being routed through the filter bank. Now, if we go to sequencer line, so trigger group 3, now we can activate trigger group 3, so oscillators 3 and 4 independently of oscillator 1 and 2, giving you basically 3 different monophonic synth parts. So remember what we had before. So now we can activate trigger group 3, and I'll just kind of set something up. Now I could go and click each one of these, and if I wanted them all to be the same, but you can do a pretty simple basic copy and paste of that note. You hold shift and the note that you want to copy, and then you can actually copy it to all of the rest of your notes. I realize it doesn't sound like anything great, but at least now you might have the capacity to activate 3 different monophonic synths with the Spectralis and kind of come up with your own patterns. And just let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see if I can answer them. Thanks.